Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting start of 2021. Still home, still broadcasting, still waiting to get the vaccine. I went with a family member this week who got vaccinated.
Excellent.
It was very, very well run.
Yeah.
I was in San Francisco. I did the exodus to Florida, and it was interesting to see how Florida did the vaccinations. Do you know anybody that got vaccinated, and how was their experience?
Oh, I've had a lot of my family members are in health. So yeah, my brother's already been vaccinated. His wife, I have a really good friend here who's been vaccinated. Yeah, I'm just waiting on. So yeah, and all of them are fine so far. Nothing crazy. So yeah, it's all been good.
I can't wait. Which did they get? Pfizer or Moderna?
No idea.
No idea. And did they do their second dosage, or everyone's got first?
One of them's already got their second. The other ones are still in their first. So yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah.
We are a data community, and what is absolutely amazing is how fast that vaccine has been pushed out. I mean, most doctors and thought leaders were like, it's 3 years away. And I just think it's just a beautiful thing that happened in the world to see this type of innovation and thought to go into the vaccines and the time. It's like everyone got together. As a data person, what has impressed you the most about how the world has rethought, reworked, re-engineered itself? What has impressed you the most as you look back, going on pretty much 11 months? What has impressed you?
I don't really it's hard to impress because there's so many things that come out on a weekly basis that are so amazing. So it's not being impressed. It's just the fact that we've all transitioned to remote work in the data sphere so successfully. It's the idea, in tech, everyone says, I don't see us ever going back. And bottom line fiscal suggests they might be right. There's a lot of companies looking at, that are shedding space into have already shed all our space. That's baffling to me because just before this thing started, well, can you handle remote employees was viewed as just something in an interview because it was viewed as a separate skill set that, only a few people had because nobody had actually needed to do this. And so that was pretty impressive. The non-COVID thing, the fact that they figured out protein folding, that's the thing that's actually blown my mind over the past year. The protein folding that they did with deep nets that actually works now.
Can you walk through the audience a little bit about that? That is a complicated concept. So can you walk us a little bit through that?
Oh, yeah. I don't actually know that much about it. So it'd be kind of foolish for me to walk people through it. I can tell you high level that they ran, for the layman, it's really easy. Like they used to, way back in the 90s and the O's or 2000s, whatever you call that decade, people used to run SETI at home on their computers. Some people would download this thing to search for extraterrestrial life. And it was something you could put on your computer so that when it was just sitting there in the background, it would churn through data to help researchers. And there was another thing you could run on your computer called protein folding at home, because there's this issue in that if you have the genetic sequence for a giant protein, you know the sequence, but you don't know the 3D shape of the thing. It's so complicated to calculate that shape. There are so many different things going on. And so people would download this thing and it would just sit there figuring out over and over and over whether folding it into this shape or this shape resulted in a lower energy state. And so that was something that a lot of people downloaded. It wasn't as well known as SETI, but it still got downloaded. Now, neural nets, the same things that allow you to that your phone figured out in, I don't even remember what it was, 2013 or 2014. All of a sudden your phone, you could speak into your phone. The year before that, you spoke into your phone. It would the translation would be awful. And then all of a sudden it was seamless. The same sort of technology applied to a three-dimensional space has allowed them to ridiculously accelerate the computation that they can do to figure out exactly what state the protein ends up in. So we no longer need supercomputers for it. They can do it on a basic level computer a lot faster. It's really, really nice. So, and that's incredible from a health perspective. It's a great thing. So, because that's going to open every single farm, every single large healthcare industry that needs to know the shape of these things to figure out what's going to happen with drugs, what's going to happen with viruses interacting with bacteria, and everything. All of this stuff now becomes widely accessible, which is great.
So many more questions I can ask on that.
Yeah, but I'm not the person to answer that. That's not.
Well, I was trying to figure out, based on what you're doing now, how did you get to that, the protein passion? Tell everybody what you're doing now, because it's not in that sector.
Yeah, no, I've never viewed myself as being in a sector. I'm right now the director of data science at BlackBerry. BlackBerry acquired a company called Cylance, which we did a lot of cybersecurity, and we're still doing a lot of cybersecurity. So that's what I do now. But before this, I was in fintech. And before that, I was in ad tech, and before that I was in defense, and I have consulted all around Los Angeles for various organizations, just a huge array of places. I came out of physics originally, so I've never viewed myself as being in one sector.
Got it. Okay.
Weirdly, like the one sector I care about is augmented reality. That's the one thing that'll drive me.
Awesome.
Protein folding, it's just, to me, it's all about, the thing that wows me about the protein folding is that a lot of scientists and a lot of people in general, but a lot of people doing their research have this thing where they like working on the puzzles, they like working on the math, but they never really connect it to the reality. And the ones that make the translation into industry, they have to start connecting it to the reality, and they're not really great at it usually. Usually people are terrible at that. And then at some point a switch turns on in people's heads and they suddenly think, oh, I really like such and such industry or such and such industry. And so some people tie themselves to an industry, but I never loved that. There's not much that like drives me in terms of passion. I still like to tie myself directly to like the techniques and the optimization and everything else, but I love to see when they're actually used for something like earth-shattering, like the protein folding. That's the best thing in the world.
And it's an interesting thought, because when people interview for a job and they keep moving from vertical to vertical, they don't maybe have the right vocabulary or the experience. But I think some of the things that the core function of some data science, I think there gives a nice dimensional feel to that, the diverse of thought that they've been and can appreciate these other verticals. I didn't realize that, a lot of the data security. So I'm going to throw another question at you.
Oh, yeah.
It's in the news, at least in my news feed, people moving to Signal for chatting and communication over WhatsApp and all this other things. Where do you see, texting or this type of communications going? It's hard to always predict future, but I'm just saying, let's say future for the next 6 months, not too far out, but is Signal here to stay? Is Signal just, this is the 15 minutes of fame?
They're so niche. I don't think it's gonna. Signal's sort of like Julian data science. Signal's like all these. Oh, Linux is gonna catch on at some point in the mass market. No, it isn't. Signal's great. I have a bunch of friends that use it. I don't use it personally, but I don't see that. Weirdly, all the innovation, if you can call it that, right now, is being driven by the conservatives fleeing these larger platforms for the places where they can scurry into and then be able to post hateful messages. And it's not all conservatives, obviously, but it's the ones that are posting these terrible things that are trying to find somewhere they can still post these terrible things. I don't think the secure apps are giving them the voice that they look for. So I don't think that that's, and so the fact is that from a perspective of scalability in terms of your overall audience, the encrypted end-to-end apps, not seeing that that's the thing that they're really looking for. That's not the thing that's really driving the market. There are people that are worried about the government, and maybe a few will fall into that sort of niche thing. But it's the Signal thing is the same problem that a lot of places have, right? I'm not going to go to a CEO and describe the internal technology of an algorithm, because that's just stupid. I'm going to tell them exactly what it does for them in terms of their bottom line, why you do it. Signal, it has the same marketing problem. Okay, it's encrypted end to end. Well, that's great, but you have to make somebody care about encryption, right? You have to make somebody think that it really matters a lot, that encryption is important. And then the question is that because a lot of these people are unfortunately swayed by propaganda, from a propaganda perspective, who's driving that fiscally from the top end? Nobody. There's nobody in the crazy conservative media would profit from that sort of thing. If it had investors that would profit directly from people switching over to that sort of platform, you might start to see some adoption. But I don't see that happening. And so, it's from a technological perspective, it's great. But from an audience perspective, I'm not seeing it going anywhere.
I have tried a few of these end encryption apps. There's a few before Signal, well-funded.
Yep.
There were a few that were used by government officials, and some of them have these things where the messages disappear after a thread, auto deletes. You can't screenshot the screen. There's some pretty neat things. What I found is that when your core family, core friends, and core people you text and chat with are not on it, it's very lonely. Yep. So it's you have your go-to. Sometimes it's a core family member. So it could be a wife, could be a son or a daughter, parent. And you're just used to going onto your phone and looking at one messaging and catching up with everybody. And then when you have to start, it's almost like with Slack or Teams, sometimes you just miss a message because you're I haven't logged in. I forgot to log in to check that one message. Mm-hmm. So that's where I've always felt, for me, how just messaging is kind of that mind share or that phone share, right? It's going to be the core messaging on one app, and then it's going to be, your Slack or Teams, then email. Like, I think it's these three buckets.
Yeah, I don't see anyone moving. Like, I mean, from a corporate perspective, no one's going to move at all because they don't have as far as I know, I mean, it's not like I use the thing service, right. But I've heard nothing to suggest they have enterprise capability at any scale that, with any level of functionality we need. So, yeah.
Yeah. I just started looking at my screen times on my phone. I'm an Android user, Google Pixel. I was surprised how much time I spend on Amazon. Like, I was surprised that Amazon is like one of my most used. I just realized I'm always looking at that. I might not buy, but I was just surprised that out of all the apps, if I would have guessed on my phone, have you ever looked at your usage and which one has surprised you on your phone?
I actually don't. So the thing is, when it comes to like time on the phone and what I do on my phone, I still don't trust, like I have an Android as well, but I still don't trust things like banking apps or things like, I mean, I have Amazon on my phone, but there's stuff that I just don't trust. So I use those things on a computer a lot. On my phone, I'm just in Chrome. I'm not some big phone power user. It's just, I'm sitting in that or a messaging app. So on my computer, yeah, we spend a lot of time on Amazon, obviously, and I have used, time tracking things in the computer, but I don't like to use them just because then I don't need the personal guilt trip. I know, like, if I'm using my computer, I want to relax and not think about things. So why would I do that to myself? Yeah.
No, I was just curious as I'm trying to get into more of a mindful place and reflective place. I was just like, what am I using the most of? Right. So it's Slack and email, a lot of music, a ton of music. I'm always listening to music. Mostly Amazon. Huh, interesting. Something else you said when we started talking about was back to remote teams, speaking about just text stuff. I think you said something that I think it was important. When you would interview, it was a checkbox. Have you managed remote teams? Okay, good. You understand what time zones are. You understand there's a late night and an early morning, something. You might understand a language difference. Okay. Check the box. Virtual interviews. Yeah, it's a nice capability. We've done that. We could do that. But we'd like to fly you in and spend a day with you. But, I'm just, again, been delighted with, remote teams also means in their same zip code now. Like, that's a remote team. It is, you're 5 minutes from me and you're remote. And guess what? It's okay. I do appreciate some of the companies that have embraced that. I read that Twitter has listed their headquarters in San Francisco for lease. Right? So I don't know if they listed the whole, I've been there many times. I don't know if it's all the floors, some of the floors. It's a spectacular space, but it's now on the market to lease. So I think I like the big, bold statements of some of these companies. Not every company can be remote, but yeah, you're managing remote teams that are actually local teams. Yep. And how is the productivity? How is the energy? How is the camaraderie? How is it going?
We're good, actually. I think lots of teams would have different situations depending on the camaraderie. Exactly. The camaraderie of the team really defines how this all works out. And I've got several sub teams under me, and actually some are better than others in terms of the team camaraderie. Like, I've got an ops team that is extremely tight knit. I have an engineering team that has some close ties with the ops team. And it actually had to do with the office space beforehand. Before this all went down, they were all in Portland. They were all in one office in a small shared space, and they were all really happy and friendly with each other. And so moving to remote didn't change it. They chat all the time. They're all great, right? My research team are people that are largely down in Irvine. And before this whole thing, they liked to work remotely a lot. Just before this whole thing went down, they seemed to work from home a lot. Cylance had a big culture of letting people work from wherever they wanted to. And as a result, there's a difference between the camaraderie and the sort of like the professionalism. The professionalism's all there. The camaraderie is there, but it's different. It's a different energy level. The research team, because they were already working remote, nothing changed. Just absolutely nothing changed. Productivity didn't budge an inch. Engineering and ops teams, I'm lucky in that because they've all managed to stay so tightly knit with each other, they've all managed to retain the lines of communication are so crucial for their jobs, specifically for getting things done. And so for them to have maintained those is great. And thus the productivity hasn't suffered at all. I'm sure that there are other similar teams in other areas because I have friends who are managers and directors and VPs. They haven't had major issues. Nobody's had what I would describe as earth-shattering issues, which is the funny thing about all this. Everyone panicked and yet nothing happened effectively. So productivity hasn't really taken the biggest hit, or or any hit on my team, thankfully. So, and I think that's a great thing overall. And it was something that beforehand, there were always people chatting about. In fact, John Chen, CEO of BlackBerry, is not a very big fan of remote work in general. He's publicly been not the biggest fan of remote work, which to me was fine. It was, everyone has their preferences. And I'm not sure if this whole situation has turned around his viewpoint on that, but BlackBerry's been fantastic about, making sure that we're all staying remote until, keeping everyone safe and healthy. And I don't think that anyone's taken that huge hit. So, which is great overall. So
happiness. How is the happiness then? Do you feel employee happiness has also ticked up or stayed the same?
It's changed. If anything, I think it's probably somewhat higher because it really depends on every person's particular living situation. So there are some people, all the single people who are by themselves, not a great situation for them. This has been kind of a horrifying situation. And some of them have managed very well and some of them haven't managed very well. So it's just, runs a spectrum. People with families, people who are married, people with kids. Depends. Most of them seem overall happier. They get to be a little bit more domestic in general. There's a little bit of frazzle caused by, I've got to deal with the kids and I got to, and so your hours take a weird hit and everything. But that hit was being taken beforehand anyway by a lot of people. It's one of those things where, I've got to juggle all this stuff. And I thought, but beforehand for the previous year and a half, you've been juggling the exact same things. You've just been coming into work while juggling. And now you're not coming into work while juggling them. So I really think it depends a lot on people's specific situations. Overall, I don't see the biggest, I think people are getting frazzled in general. A lot of people are just getting frazzled, staying at home and, being away from other people for this long. So that's there's a psychological hit. But from a corporate perspective, I don't think it's like the remote work perspective isn't the biggest deal. There are some people that can't handle it. There are a handful of, it's a small number, but there are a small number of people who really value being around their colleagues a lot. But in general, most people are perfectly fine, sitting at home and doing things remotely. So
yeah, I've been asking that question to friends, colleagues, other executives on happiness. And what I'm hearing from you is what I'm hearing also. The work from home right now has been an interesting work from home because in many of the states, you don't have the true distractions. Most people are like, I'm working from home, but I'm going to the gym and then I'm going to go play tennis and then I'm going to catch up on everything else. But I'm working from home today. There is nowhere to go. So when people are working from home, it's like most people are like really working from home and have to work. It's going to be very interesting and delightful when people can still work from home and things are open.
Yep.
I think that will be nice. Or I would like to have in the Valley where I used to work before my exodus to Florida, there are unlimited vacation days. There was many reasons they did that. Most people never took them, tax reasons. But that whole thing of like, hey, I'm going to be online this afternoon because in the morning I have to do an errand. I'm going to be online later tonight because I have to do. So those words, I'm going to be online later, no one uses anymore. But that balance is going to be delightful where you don't have to run into meetings or try to like have your day preoccupied about getting out early to miss traffic to go home to get something done. So I think there's going to be some great, I hope, long-term benefits to this. We are a community and the community is as strong as people's connections. So I will connect you, David, to a few people, of course, in our community. I'll add a link to your LinkedIn profile. Also have the luxury of meeting people. So for me, we started this podcast for this, is to meet like-minded enthusiasts of data who have point of views. I think you and I would have met at a show, at an event, at an airport. Like I do believe in serendipity. I do believe in like fate and karma and things like that. We just forced our own fate. So if you come out this way ever, I'd love to grab a drink with you. And if I get out there, we'll take you up out there. Like, what are your thoughts on just hanging out? And what are your thoughts on community building right now? What's the big value do you think a community can bring to people in this time?
Community building is fantastic. Before this, and frankly, before I worked at BlackBerry, I was in Los Angeles and spent a lot of time getting people together, going to groups, doing everything that I could do to, figure out, what the community was and whether or not, and some people did it in a purely exploitative fashion, and some people did it just for the camaraderie, and there's a million different motivations. So community building is really, really important. I don't see as much of it happening right now, and I think that's because I think people's minds are not thinking, hey, big events. I think that people's minds have sort of shifted away from that being a reality, because the fact is that that's the one issue with the voice-to-voice thing, is that the bigger the group gets, and voice-to-voice, in this sort of like, in Zoom or Skype or Teams or anything, whatever you're using, you can't sidebar really effectively. You can't take it off to a side conversation. And so the community building thing is fantastic, but it has to stay in sort of smaller groups. And so, I mean, we have a machine learning group that meets like bi-monthly or a little bit more frequently. And we've been doing that for almost a decade now, and I have other groups that are small that have still like some of them are learning groups. A lot of them are just enthusiasts, that still meet sporadically. So those things are good. The ones that were really strong beforehand are still fine, but people trying to foster those things right now, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of people doing that. And it would be great if people were doing that. But again, the technology, I would love if Zoom were to come out with something, just a basic sidebar functionality, so you could take it, to a side channel with somebody really easily. I know it's not the same thing as a full-fledged conversation and like hearing other people's words and being able to dive in and out of conversations, but at the same time, it'd be really nice.
Yeah, so. No, you hit on some of the learnings that I've also discovered is I built this community in a sense of loneliness, mindfulness, empathy, helping introverts in this crazy time. And we went from like 0 to I think we're at like 9,000 people in the community. It's too big. So the reason why I do these podcasts is to meet, and then I can then kind of weave individual conversations, right?
Yep.
Maybe not scalable. And then when we meet as a community, we typically meet just like, we'll just grab 10 or 12 people together and we just do a huddle or something like that. Because you're right. And we'll do it for 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. Like time is valuable. Zoom fatigue is real. And I think after a long day, you don't want to have another like drink night with a community. You're just exhausted on Zoom. So it's just like, how do you weave a slot to get people together, but the right number of people just to keep a friend connection that could turn into a career connection as people look to move and move around. I mean, this is things that I think about. And I always say like when the world reopens, our community will change, might go away, but that's okay. We were here for this moment, and we helped during this moment, and that's okay.
Yeah, that fatigue thing you brought up with is actually interesting because I've got a lot of friends that love to do video game streaming and they don't have that fatigue at all. They've just zero fatigue. They Zoom at work and then they come home and they are on Discord or Zoom or whatever for hours. And they do this day in and day out, just all over and over. And that's not my cup of tea. It's not my thing. But at the same time, it's interesting to me that I have a feeling that the Zoom fatigue from some people is being translated into fatigue due to Zoom as opposed to fatigue due to not really having a purpose in terms of like being there and not having like that sort of shared experience, which is something that Zoom doesn't provide. Zoom also, there is nothing in Zoom aside from you and other people. There is no shared experience. And so that's a big deal as well, is that you don't have, so if people are playing a video game or if people are in a work meeting that they actually really appreciate, that they like, something they're passionate about, or if people are in like a group that they're learning about, they love it. But as soon as that shared experience goes away, then people start.
It's interesting because I thank you for challenging me on that. It's like meeting fatigue. It's like you leave a meeting and be like, that was a waste of my hour. Like that was a waste of time. I didn't need to be there. And you're right. You sometimes get pulled into these 30, 45 1-hour meetings. You speak for 6 minutes of it or something like that. And then there's other things going on. You're right. Maybe it's just Zoom passive watching fatigue versus active participant.
Yeah.
And then you're just fatigued, which is okay. Yeah, that's super cool. David, thanks. Thanks for hanging with us. This is pretty cool. This is the Data Standards podcast. We are sponsored by Pandio. Pandio does pretty cool AI with distributed messaging. There's a few people I'm going to connect you with. Pandio will be one of them. Thanks for being on the show, brother.
Yeah, thanks very much, man. Have a good day.